I would like to welcome everybody this morning or this afternoon, depending in which part of the world you are. My name is Carolina Rossini, and I'm the founding CEO of Portulans Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank based here in Washington, DC, with collaborators in Geneva and Toronto. We are a young organization founded last year, and our mission includes informing stakeholders by producing independent, rigorous, and metrics and database research. You can learn more about us at portulansinstitute.org. And today is my honor to host this regional spotlight event focused on the Middle East and North Africa in cooperation with Unesco, the American University in Cairo, and the American Chamber in Egypt. So I really want to appreciate and thank our partners for helping us put this together and for the partnership for the last couple of months. So this is a 2-hour event program, which is divided in 2 core segments. The first segment focuses on digital transformation in the Mena region, the region digital progress, and how we build forward better, especially in this moment we are all facing a pandemic, COVID. During the second segment, my colleague Dr. Bruno Lanvin will present the recently released Network Readiness Index, which we launched on October 19, with highlighting the findings for the Mena region. This presentation will be followed by a discussion of those results with our wonderful panelists. I also want to give a special thanks to STL, which is our NRI 2020 knowledge partner. I also want to thank, I also actually want to invite our partner, Dr. Sharif Kamel, who is the president of Ancient Egypt and the Dean of School of Business at the American University in Cairo, for his welcome words.
Thank you very much, Carolina, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I hope that you, your loved ones, your families and your friends are all safe and in good health. Again, on behalf of the School of Business at AUC and the American Chamber of Commerce, it is true delight to be joining this event in collaboration with the Portulans Institute and Unesco. And it's also a delight to be joining a group of distinguished scholars and experts discussing issues related to readiness in the Mena region and the journey of digital transformation. Let me just walk you through a couple of thoughts to kickstart the conversation today. And I'll label it under the title, Does Digital Transformation Presents an Opportunity to Autocorrect? People around the world over the past, 30, 40 years have always been talking about disruption, but we always had in mind technology and how technology is affecting our lives. We've seen that over the past many, many years. Well, 2019 had a different surprise. Disruption came in the form of a pandemic. It was like a stealth attack, a perfect storm, an invisible enemy. And ironically, what came to the rescue was digital transformation. In a way, of course, there is no one size that fits all, but at the same time, that pandemic affected the lives and livelihood of so many people. No discrimination in developed countries, developing economy, advanced economy, poorer economies. And the notion of staying away, I do not like to use the word social distancing, because I do not think we've been ever more social than the last 10 months. I rather use the word physical distancing is actually dominating. So it's affecting the way we work, the way we shop, the way we study, the way we communicate with our friends and colleagues from around the world. How this is going to span out, whether we're going to go through a U-shaped recession or a V-shaped recession, it remains to be seen. But one thing for sure, it is definitely an opportune moment to look at digital transformation. And we have to really remind ourselves, it did not just start this past March. We've just seen an acceleration of digital transformation over the past 9 or 10 months or so. But we've been seeing the digital transformation getting into our lives over the past maybe 2-3 decades. If I zoom in on the MENA region, on Egypt, I truly believe this is an opportune moment to adopt digital transformation. And the government, and we're going to hear shortly from one of our distinguished colleagues on the panel, Dr. Ahmed, dwelling on that, have been going in that direction. I truly believe in a country with 100 million, with the vast majority of the population is under the age of 60% of them under the age of 30. Many of them are technology savvy. Mobility penetration is close to 99%. Internet penetration is exceeding 60%. It provides the platform to really dwell on digital transformation and capitalize on this moment in government practices, in business transaction, in actually disrupting the legacies that could be an impediment, not just to use technology, but also financial inclusion, but also promoting a vibrant, agile, and competitive private sector. All this can be enabled through digital transformation. With in mind, the government as an enabler, the private sector as a driver, and the civil society surely as a supporter. Just to give you some statistics, for example, when we go to the financial inclusion, we look at Egypt with 100 million people, no more than 14% of the adult population bank their money, which is stunning. And probably it's one of the least percentages and averages in the world. But again, I like to look at the glass half full. This is an opportunity to move that segment in the society into becoming part of the formal sector, which will definitely have positive implications on the economy. Again, Cairo is not Egypt. Egypt is represented by 27 different provinces. And if we go into these provinces, some of them are close to 1,000 kilometers away to the south of Cairo. There are spots of opportunities that can definitely be very well served through digital transformation. Let it be in healthcare, let it be in education, let it be even deploying technology in manufacturing and agriculture and so on. One important element, which is key, is investing in human capital. I'm not one of the believers that technology is going to replace human beings, but I think we need to reskill ourselves, we need to refocus and be better equipped to deal with technology rather than be replaced by technology. I think that's the way moving forward, especially within the notion of the fourth industrial revolution. Last 2 points I want to share is we've seen in this region, across the MENA region and including Egypt, the proliferation of tech-enabled and tech startups, innovative young entrepreneurs who do not really want to sort of, as it used to be before, work for the government, but I want to go out there, take the risk and have their own startups. And we've been seeing those startups across different sectors, let it be agriculture, healthcare, transportation, education, renewable energy, and they're making their mark on the society. Investing in human capital, investing in entrepreneurship and innovation is definitely one way to move forward within the world of digital transformation, to unleash the potential of the private sector and also reduce in many ways, and that's a very important point, bureaucracy. I always joke about this. We're a country of 5,000 years, and I think even if we did not invent bureaucracy, we actually mastered it, we perfected it. So digitization can help reducing that big time. Finally, my last point, changing behavior and the shift to digital platforms. All of us, we always talk about change, we promote change, we push for change, but we never want to change. Come COVID-19, actually, it pushed us to change. Maybe because we did not have any other options, but actually we've seen this in business, in shopping online, which by the way, even compared to other countries in the region, we were in the lower quartile. But over the past several months, these numbers went up staggering to averages that we've never reached before. And I do not think we're going to go back when this whole thing is over to what where we used to be. But I think we will reach some middle ground. To finalize my opening remarks, I truly believe that a well-established, innovation-driven, government-enabled, private sector-led digital transformation strategy can definitely impact the economy into becoming more competitive, more inclusive, and that definitely provides an opportunity for Egypt to autocorrect. The one important thing is it's not the biggest or the richest or the poorer or the slowest who's going to be able to navigate those difficult times, but it's the organization that is more adaptive to the continuous changes that are taking place. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I turn it back to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif, so much for your welcoming remarks and for this great overview of Egypt, especially. So now allow me to quickly cover some housekeeping for our attendees joining us. So thank you so much for all those who have joined us in the last few minutes. We will have opportunity for a Q&A today, and I encourage you to send your questions in the Q&A tool in Zoom. You are also encouraged to identify the speaker you want to address the question and identify yourself. We also encourage you to share your thoughts and comments online by following Portulans Institute on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And we will be live tweeting during this panel under the hashtag NRI2020. So now I have the pleasure to invite to the floor our moderator for today's panel, Maroulla Haddad. She's the Senior Digital Development Policy Specialist for Digital Development at the World Bank. Maroulla is a regulatory economist with over 13 years of experience in the policy and regulatory reforms of the telcos and ICT sector in developing and emerging markets. During the last 4 years, she has worked with the digital team at the World Bank on various analytical and operational projects in M&A, Africa, and ECA regions. Prior to joining the World Bank, Maroulla was a policy analyst in the Market and Competition Unity at the Telecommunications and Regulatory Authority of Lebanon. So thank you so much, Maroulla, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carolina. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very good.
Thank you, Carolina, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to our discussion today on digital transformation in the Mena region. As Dr. Sharif mentioned, the topic is gaining a lot of momentum in our region and worldwide. But more and more within our work with the World Bank, we're finding that governments in the region are interested in tapping into the potential of digital transformation. And that was even before COVID. Let's not forget that many countries in the region are facing different types of shocks, from economic due to the drop in oil prices, the shrinking fiscal space, still ongoing political instabilities and conflict. So even before COVID, governments in the region are looking for ways to diversify the economy, to offer new job opportunities for their youth, and to lay the groundwork for a more sustainable economic future. In the region, there is a lot of different countries at different level of advancement and development in this space. The GCC has always been on top of all the measures and indicators. But more and more, we're seeing countries like Egypt, Morocco, Iraq, West Bank and Gaza that are really looking into how to leverage the digital transformation, whether on the public services and the government side, or the business and the economic, different economic sectors. So that's the good thing. The good thing is that we as a government, as governments and countries in MENA, are more and more aware that we can no longer afford to not take this seriously. And it is now for the topic of transitioning to a digital economy is now front and central in many national strategies. However, what we're finding also is that there are important bottlenecks that governments and policymakers need to address, so that we can really be can really catch this strain and be competitive and at par with other countries in the region. And one of the most important is the political will to act on reforms. We find that there are really sensitive issues and important and political economy issues that needs to be addressed. For instance, many countries still have state-owned enterprises operating in the market. Government needs to address some rigid rules on monetary policies. We need to look into the agriculture sector, an old but a very important sector in the region, how to really transform that. These are important and sometimes not very popular the decisions and policies to take and reforms to implement. And so even when there is a will, sometimes many of our governments lack the leadership to act on these reforms and the vision to really know where we want to go. What is what's each country's competitive advantage and how to act on it in this digital transformation sphere. So I find analytical work like the NRI is very important to give us some sort of intelligence and leads on what are the most impactful areas that we need to look into. Is it skills? Is it infrastructure? Is it capacity building for institutions, governance? What are the low-hanging fruits? What are our weaknesses and strengths in this ecosystem? The digital economy ecosystem is quite a big and encompassing ecosystem that touches on many aspects of policies in a country. So that's why I'm looking forward to this discussion and the presentation on the results of the NRA, which for this year is digital transformation. But before that, I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming our panelists today. And in alphabetic order, I will introduce them. Carolina, do we have Gaurav or not yet?
No, we don't have. Manish would join us from STL, and he has not joined yet.
Okay, so please let me go ahead and introduce Paul Hector from Unesco Regional Bureau for Sciences and the Arab States, Professor Nagla Rizq, Professor of Economics and Founding Director of the Access to Knowledge for Development Center at the American University of Cairo School of Business, and Dr. Ahmed Tantawi, Advisor to the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology in Egypt. So I would like you to invite you all to check the events page for a full bio for our panelists. We will have a couple of questions for our discussant, and then we will open it to Q&A and questions from the audience, if any. So first, I would like to address Dr. Tantawi. Dr. Tantawi, you've been core, and as I know firsthand, to the effort of the Egyptian government to initiate and accelerate transition to digital economy. So in your opinion, what are the key elements for successful national strategy and a vision for countries like Egypt and many countries in the region that are starting or want to accelerate this transition? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maroulla. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. The word core is a big word. I'm not really core, but as an advisor, it's flattering to know that at least somebody listened to you and somebody is, took whatever you said into consideration, whether accepting it or not. In general, going back to your question about the elements of developing a successful strategy, I'd say to my fellow strategists in the region, a few words, actually. First is that your strategy is yours, right? The strategy is about actually, charting a way that takes you from where you are to where you want to be, you, not anybody else. So that's a very important thing. Don't try to emulate. And this is a mistake that many of us do, try to be like country A or country B and so on and so forth, or emulate whatever is done in a more advanced country or even a different country. So that's an important point. The second point is that most often we look at ICT as an industry or as a product. ICT, in my view, is more of a tool than a product. It's an important sector, definitely, an important sector in the national economy. In terms of GDP contribution, in terms of employment, in terms of FDI and all that. But it has greater impact if it's used as a leverage, that affects the other sectors. In Egypt, for instance, ICT as an industry, as a sector, is growing. It has grown from like 3.2 to 4% of the national GDP. That's huge and that's good, but it can affect, or actually its effect would be greater if it affects the other 96%. So rather than focus on the 4%, focus on how this 4% can grow while affecting the growth of the rest of the 96%. This is a very important point. It's important to look at that, and it's also important to look at it as something that affecting not just the economy, but affecting the happiness of people, the lifestyle, the social inclusion, employment, everything else that is also, probably, at least as equal to in importance to the economy. I see that we have professors of business here. I don't want to offend anybody, but society is also important. The third point is ranking and indices are very important, but their importance is actually in the fact that they help you as a strategist by giving you an objective assessment of where you are, of what you have. So that's very important. Of course, it's based on a certain set of measures and so on, but let's not have the ranking and indices be our obsession. I don't want to be the best in the world in index A or B or C. It's up to me as a strategist to focus on my own case again and look at what my priorities are, what my abilities are, and how I can move from, again, point A, where I am today, to point B, where I want to be. Where I want to be is something that I have to define. Again, we have to use indices to, as measures and things that can, help us do that. What we've done in Egypt in particular, I'm not going to take too much time, just in a couple of minutes, is really develop a strategic plan that capitalizes on our strengths and assets, of course. But we've also tried to address the root causes of the slow progress in previous plans. Egypt has been digital transforming for many, many years, a few decades actually. But we've had very slow progress in some areas, and we tried to look at those while readjusting our strategy, right? So we focused on long-term strategic objectives of course, that are linked in a linked in a way that links the different sectors together, different initiatives together. Don't develop them as silos. And this was a problem that we had before. Actually, not everything was, included in an overall strategy for the nation as a whole, right? So you had a strategy for the sector, for the health sector, the education, the economy, and so on. We try to be more integrated. We try to link things together and prioritize the initiatives so they work together. The second point is the anticipation of the execution problems that we've seen, right? And these include the inefficient bureaucracy. We talked about bureaucracy. There's inefficiency in there. We know that there are suboptimal organizational setups that we have. We know that there are conflicts over power, over turfs, over missions, and so on and so forth. Pragmatically, these are very important things that we need to consider. And in addition to pragmatism, which should not slow us down, should just help us to develop better plans, we have to have some boldness really in our definition of what our objectives and our plans. And we hopefully now we have a very strong support from the highest authority in the country, and this is very important actually in all other countries. If you don't have that, you're bound to get into conflict between ministries, between organizations, between private and public sector, and so on. So our strategy focuses on 3 sets of initiatives that are built on 3 foundational layers, if you will. The 3 sets of initiatives for now, right? This could change over the years and will change, of course. But for now, it's the digital transformation projects that the government is spearheading. Again, the private sector is still not really up to par, honestly, and we need to push that, and that's part of the initiatives as well. But one initiative is to ensure that the government is doing whatever it can to sort of be a role model in that digital transformation. The second pillar or set of initiatives are related to skill development. Without proper skills, we cannot execute. So we need those proper skills. We also need to ensure that our youth is trained on the new technologies and the new things that are needed in the digital job market, whether this is in the country or outside the country. So the job market itself, and then the support for the digital initiatives that we have. The third and last pillar, which is really probably the most important one, is the focus on innovation. Because innovation, yes, absolutely, it drives competitiveness. It helps you create more companies and more a vibrant economy and so on. But it also affects efficiency. Innovation in doing everything. Innovation for really the most junior employee in a company or a government organization is very important, because then they can do things better, and we need that. The last point is the foundational layers that we build on top are clearly the infrastructure. We all know that. The legal framework is very important and often forgotten or not taken very seriously, but this is very important. Intellectual property rights, all the conflicts and so on. So that's important. And the last and most important thing is the social moral principles that should guide everything, like inclusion, like equity, like all these things they have to be really at the foundation of everything we do and all the plans we develop. And I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tantawi. So I'll take your last comment on inclusion to address Professor Rizet on the inequalities that have new inequalities also that have arisen from the digital world. And as we've seen from the pandemic, we have more inequalities within the countries, within the country itself, whether gender, socioeconomic, etc., and across countries. So I would like to ask you, Dr. Rizet, what do you think and how do you think we can leverage these same digital tools to bridge the digital divide and reduce the inequalities in a post-COVID world? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maroulla. I will try to be brief in my few minutes. So let me, I emphasize what everybody has said, in the sense that the pandemic has really pushed us into scenarios that we had anticipated for a longer time frame. Now we are immediately pushed into the reality of what we see today. So I have 3 points to make. First, I want to say a few words about the region. I want to say a few words about the paradox of technologies, and I want to address how the technologies can actually leverage these inequalities. So very quickly, the region, just looking at the NRI, it ranks before last in all categories. So this gives us a sense of where we are compared to the rest of the world. There are inequalities between us and the rest of the world. There are inequalities between countries of the region, and actually, as you quite rightly said, within countries themselves. The way to address this is we have to remember the uniqueness of the demographic characteristics of this region, which Sharif has pointed to. We have a region that has a high youth population, the highest in the world, highest rates of youth unemployment, unemployment of the educated, predominance of an informal sector. We have unemployment rates that reach on average between 26 and 29%, much worse for females, 39%, low rates of labor force participation, and again, worse for females. This is a starting point, and that's important. When we talk about inequality, we need to remember this, because this is the future, and we are looking at the reality of the region, and the future has come to us right here and now with its inequalities. Now, with digital technologies, they have a paradox. On the one hand, they can actually indeed exacerbate inequalities, and even more now with artificial intelligence and new technologies that can exacerbate existing inequalities, and ones that actually came even more with the pandemic. So we have you have inequalities in data ownership, which affects market concentration. You have biases in data inaccuracies, invisibility of marginalized groups in databases. This will translate if taken as such, into the threat of marginalizing policies, development policies, potential biases in algorithms, potentially causing allocative harms, the possibility of decontextualized algorithms, if there is not conscious effort to involve domain experts in AI planning and members of the community. You have inequality in the skills, and now with the, everybody's talking the future of work. What is it that we have? And we need to know what is happening on the ground, which needs a strong database. So on the one hand, all of this can be exacerbated by the technologies. But on the other hand, we can indeed make conscious steps, make conscious effort to mitigate these technologies using these very tools, as Dr. Ahmed has actually also quite pointed to. It is important to look, the term ICT 4D, ICT for development, is a very real term. So how can we use the technologies in education, in youth entrepreneurship, in data-driven innovation? So let me just take a couple of minutes to give a few examples. And I did look at the numbers from the NRI. For example, for education, the use of technology for education, the potential is incredible. And it's not a choice anymore with the pandemic. This is something that was brought right there and then in front of us. We have to deal with it. How can we use technologies to improve education, lifelong learning, not only formal education, skill development, reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling between technology for people in other domains. I looked at the numbers, and for example, Lebanon and Morocco have very interesting numbers, and they score very highly on internet in education. There is evidence there. Let's capitalize on this. Expand that. Have teacher training. Partner with telecoms to expand connectivity. Elsewhere, we need to strengthen the infrastructure. So education and learning is a clear example. Entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship. Jordan has a fantastic figure when it comes to a business component of technology. It's incredible. So you have a potential, Jordan and elsewhere, of course, in the Arab world, for capitalizing on what we have and working with entrepreneurial skills. Mobile app development in the Arab world, there are figures that are quite good. They're not bad at all. So in looking at this region, let's try and capitalize on what we have. Look at the uniqueness of this region. Definitely for health, and I know Dr. Ahmed is involved in an initiative for health issues related to commerce. Tunisia, for example, has the Startup Act, which actually has contributed a lot to the startup scene in many parts of the Arab world, certainly in the Gulf countries, but also in Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, other parts of the Arab world. There are tremendous potentials and opportunity to capitalize on the vast wealth of human resources that we have in using the digital tools for improving the livelihoods of people. And yes, Dr. Ahmed, I totally agree with you. It's not just the economy, it's development in its larger sense, in the sense in order to use the technology, not only for immediate safety net, because with the pandemic, there's a need, for example, for better data, for safety nets and better planning for harmed groups. So we need better data, better tools to depict what is there on the ground, what are the needs, what are the realities, better entrepreneurial opportunities, and move forward not only to capture all the data pixels or the reality around us, but also for inclusive development planning. And this is the reality. I mean, at the end of the day, to live to the true promise of ICT for development, for real inclusive development in its larger sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nagla. It's very important. One of the things you've mentioned, and that we're finding also is is gaining a lot of momentum, is data governance and how we deal with, from the privacy and from the trust perspective, so that we encourage more people to use platforms, to use digital finance, to use digital for their businesses and for government functions also. And this would create some sort of economic value. Without that, without the trust in using the data and using these platforms that somehow we lack in the region, we might not be able to translate the use of digital into productive uses, and that's a very that's a loop, that's the part of the ecosystem also. So thank you very much for your answer. So I'll turn to Paul. Paul, maybe you'd like to give us, in your experience and in your opinion, what do you think that are the safeguards or the actions or the reforms? What do we need to put in place to ensure that no one is left behind, and to ensure that we all benefit from and can harness the benefit of this transformation? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Maroulla, and let me say good afternoon to everyone. And let me also echo the thanks of the earlier panelists to the Portulans Institute and to the partners represented here for making today's event possible. Well, let me start by talking about the 2030 SDGs. I think we're all aware that most countries across the region are facing challenges in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, key to the SDGs is the realization of this commitment of ensuring that no one is left behind. Unfortunately, this situation of the challenges in reaching the SDGs has actually been worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, digital technologies offers really an incredible opportunity to accelerate progress on these 2030 development goals if we can make sure that it's inclusive. And so with a view to looking at digital transformation as really an opportunity to overcome societal, economic, and environmental challenges, I think there's lots of good things that we can look forward to. Now, many of you may be familiar with the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation. And within this framework, UNESCO has identified 5 priority areas of action that can really help to ensure that digital transformation is an inclusive process that supports the vision of no one left behind. And there are 5 aspects that I'd like to sort of highlight and unpack a bit. So first of all, we need an inclusive digital economy and society. Secondly, as other speakers have said before, it's really key that we develop human capacity and also institutional capacity. Very important as well is the protection of human rights and ensuring human agency. The matter of trust, digital trust, security, stability, this is also important for making sure that people participate. And finally, we must foster digital cooperation. So let me just quickly go through each of these 5 and highlight a couple of key points. So first of all, starting with building an inclusive digital economy and society. So everybody must participate and participate in a meaningful way. Now, if you look at the situation of women, women make up more than 50% of the population, but unfortunately they lag behind in key metrics for participation, usage, and access to digital technologies. So really, we must give priority to erasing this gender divide. And as earlier speakers mentioned, if you look at the demographic within Arab countries, we have something like 60% of the Arab population being under 30. We see also persons with disabilities making up something like around 15–16% of the populations. The Arab region is also host to millions of migrants, internally displaced persons, rural communities, and other marginalized groups who are facing challenges in meeting their daily basic needs. So ensuring that they can also access and benefit from digital transformation is really, really crucial. And of course, it's not just enough to have access. We need to make sure that people have access to content, to tools that are linguistically and culturally relevant, and of course that they have the skills for using them, which of course brings us to the second point, developing human and institutional capacity. Now, there are many new technologies coming in, and of course there are many forums like this one where we're talking about the new technologies, what's happening. And if this discussion is to really catalyze broader national development, we need to ensure that these discussions are really public, that we have many stakeholders involved. And so to do this, we need to invest in raising awareness of all stakeholders, working closely with the public, working with civil society. And of course, this means ensuring that citizens have the digital literacy and the media and information literacy skills that will allow them to participate in these conversations. In parallel, we also need to work and support public institutions. One of the challenges sometimes is embedding participatory approaches in the development of policies. And unfortunately, when that happens, when all stakeholders are not involved, the policies which are developed, they have gaps. So let's overcome this. Let's work with public institutions. Let's work with other institutions to make sure that the policies really have been informed by the views of others. Earlier speakers talked about innovation, and it's really important that we build national institutions, we develop policies and programs that support the local startup economies and the creation of relevant local content. Unfortunately, we see very good examples of this, across the region. Also very important to promote open access to scientific information and also to open educational resources. This is really vital. As we know, access to information, access to data, this is key to driving our creativity, driving problem solving, to supporting knowledge production and innovation. And of course, we need research that also promotes evidence-based policy so we can be more effective. And of course, within the framework of institutional capacity and human development, again, addressing the gender divide, it's also key. So let's touch on the third point, human rights and human agency. So this is really crucial for harnessing the benefits of the digital transformation. UNESCO developed the Internet Universality framework in 2015. This was endorsed by some 195 of our member states. And this framework argues for a rights-based, open, accessible, and multi-stakeholder approach to digital governance. And we use the acronym ROAM, R for rights, O for open, A for accessible, and M for multi-stakeholder to refer to these principles. Now, unfortunately, when we look around, we see problems like online harassment, we see hate speech, we see disinformation. These are all barriers to meaningful participation online. And so it's really important that we effectively address these challenges. And this, of course, requires thinking and acting on content governance and developing mechanisms that can ensure that rights are respected both online and also offline. Now let's look at trust, digital trust, security, and stability. And here I'd like to touch on the aspect of artificial intelligence, which several speakers spoke about earlier. Now, one of the things that we are seeing is that research and the implementation of AI systems is really advancing quite rapidly. Unfortunately, the legal, societal, and the ethical ecosystems which are needed to guide it and support it, these are moving much more slowly. So there's really a need for some normative frameworks to harmonize and govern this growth. And so we need to ensure that AI and also other emerging technologies are guided by ethical frameworks and ensure that these benefit everyone. And of course, this is key to preventing the exacerbation of existing gaps, which earlier speakers spoke about. So I come to the last point. And this has to do with digital cooperation. And again, there's a lot happening. We have to avoid reinventing the wheel, and we need to benefit from opportunities to leapfrog. And so, of course, this presents us with collaboration, presents us with great opportunities to achieve this. There are many good practices, so let's adopt them. Of course, open standards and frameworks. And so really, we need to scale up and replicate these initiatives for greater local impact and also across the region. So
many thanks, Paul, for your answer. Sorry to interrupt. We have to, I'm told we're a bit behind. So thanks, but we will have an opportunity to come back to you.
Yes.
I think we want to have another round of quick questions, and if I may ask our speakers to really limit the intervention to 3 minutes, that would be great and helpful. So I want to go back to Dr. Ahmed Tantawi. You talked specifically about a vision that is tailored and specific to each country, and that we need to know where we are and where we need to go. So in your opinion, and very briefly, what do you think the MENA region as a region has? What is the comparative advantage of the MENA region? And how we can build on that? What do we have to offer so that we become competitive as a region?
Great, thank you. Very briefly, the main competitive, the MENA region, or the main asset it has is its youth. As it was mentioned before, 60% of the population is under the age of 30. A very large percentage of those are digitally aware. They live in digital space for extended periods of time. I guess there was a statistics that says like typically there are 16 million Egyptians that are online at any point in time, at least, you know, that's which is unbelievable. I wonder, when do they actually work? Maybe they work online. They do actually, some of them. But in any case, so that is the main asset. That does not translate necessarily into a valuable asset unless you train those people on doing useful things, right? Being online chatting with friends is good, but it's not productive, right? So we need to train those youth, right? Develop the skills that they need to be productive. And productive not in the sense that they have to be able to work or write code or, you know, do those kind of IT things, but really use IT to doing things that are very productive and useful, right? Developing services platforms and using them for cultural projects, for cultural activities, for entertainment, for education, for all sorts of things that they need to do. Now, training is important, of course, and it can be done. There are initiatives for that in every country. The problem here is the scarcity of the high quality educational programs in most of these countries. There are very few good computer science or tech enabled training, right, in universities and even you know, schools in the whole region. The problem is not about designing programs, that's easy, but finding people who can teach these programs is a problem. Now, luckily, with the post-COVID world, with, you know, everything going online, there's been development of a lot of material around the world, including in this region, but mostly in other countries that can be used globally. So that gives us access to a tremendous amount of programs that we can use to train our people, which is again, that really triggered into us in Egypt, you know, an initiative to use that particularly, you know, online education to grow and train thousands of people on the good things. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Tatawi. Back to you, Professor Rizk. So we haven't touched really on the subject of digital infrastructure and good governance, but we've seen that especially, specifically in the context of COVID, countries with good digital infrastructure and governance were able to deal more with the crisis. So why do you think digital infrastructure is important, and what is the role of the private and public sector in setting the framework for the infrastructure and good governance practices?
Thank you, Maroulla. Let me just start by saying digital infrastructure is crucial, yes. It is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I want to go back to the message of the report, message number 1 actually of the NRI report, that says the importance of adopting a multidimensional approach in improving network readiness rather than focusing on just a few policy areas. Infrastructure is crucial, but the problem in our region is that we suffer from the ills of a fragmented approach. So what we see, again, looking at the numbers, we look at, you know, just a sample of our countries. For example, Qatar and the Emirates, when you look at the access is technologies, access, content, and future technology. We score beautifully on access. So we have the digital infrastructure. In fact, Qatar tops the #1 country in technology, which is Switzerland. The score is higher than Switzerland at 92+. But look at the content and look at the future technology, and we really do not perform very well there. So the problem here is that technology, yes, is important, but it's only one part of the story. And it's really, really important to look at the rest of the story, because if we have only the technology, we're not progressing very much. If you just dissect the technology into again, the access, the content, and future technology, it's amazing what we see as the numbers of even our best performers. There is a huge anomaly in the performance of our countries, including Egypt. For example, Egypt in the 4G mobile network coverage scores 89 out of 100. And then look at fixed broadband subscriptions, 14.6. So this kind of fragmentation anomaly does not bring the results that are needed. The important crucial component in the NRI actually is the future technologies, because you look at computer software spending and robot density, and again, you find Arab countries faring really poorly. So A, yes, it's important, very important to strengthen the technology, but B, it is also important to invest in in other organizational factors and complementary factors that will help us reap the benefit of technology. I am not a technology person, but I do know from my colleagues in the field that issues related to Arabization of technology, for example, Arabization of platform is an issue. Issues related to the language. I am sure issues related to digital payments, and I know that Sharif mentioned the percentage of people who are banked to start with. So if we're looking at digital payment infrastructure, that's an issue. I would like to think actually of infrastructure in the larger sense, including governance, as you quite rightly mentioned, but including other elements related, regulatory environment, the human capital as part of the infrastructure. Just one last point to answer your question. A clear collaboration between private public partnerships, that's clear, but also with civil society as well. Education offers a very good example, because there's huge potential for telecoms to expand connectivity, to expand the digital infrastructure, but we have a role as educators for training people, as trainers or as educators to help with developing the human infrastructure of the process. So you have the private sector investing in connectivity, you have trainers, you have civil society, you have international organizations, different interest groups who work together from a multi-stakeholder perspective to actually achieve the objective that is, would be hoped for by investing in infrastructure. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Many thanks, professors. And that's one of the webinars that I'm attending where there is no connectivity issues. So it's good. Sometimes it's worked very well. Back to you, Paul. We would like to hear a little bit more about what UNESCO is doing in supporting the MENA region in this digital transition, digital transformation, and to have an inclusive vision and transformation for our economy and society. Over to you.
Hi, well, thank you very much, Maroulla. So I raised five areas, and in the interest of time, I'll be very quick. I'll just highlight some of the areas in which we're working. So again, with a view to building skills, building into institutional capacity, we've been running a program called Skills for the Digital and Knowledge Societies. And in this, we've been focusing on women and we've been focusing on youth. We've been supporting work across the Arab region, looking at, for example, helping young persons to develop skills to become, let's say, mobile app developers. And for those who are interested in entrepreneurship, helping to give them the possibilities through mentorship, boot camps, etc., to also look at developing startups. As part of this work, building skills, we're also addressing issues like media and information literacy. Within this work, we've been supporting skills in areas such as robotics and providing introductions to coding. Let me talk about something we call the ITU UNESCO Regional Digital Inclusion Week for Arab States. And this is a week which we started since 2017. And basically this week promotes collaboration between government, intergovernmental, academic, private sector, and also civil society, both within and outside the region. And the whole idea behind this is to shine a spotlight on the role that digital inclusion can play in sustainable socioeconomic development. And during this week, we addressed barriers such as affordability, lack of digital skills, gender inequality, the needs of persons with disabilities, and much more. And again, the whole idea is to make sure that vulnerable sectors of Arab societies can participate in and also benefit from the digital revolution. And this has really been fantastic. We've had tremendous support from from governments all across the region, and we've been able to run things like innovation boot camps, do tech startups, and also zero in on key problems, and also give rise to a couple startups which are actually doing well and progressing. So we think this is something very important, and some of these are also being led by women. I just want to touch on something we call the UNESCO Internet Universality Indicators. Earlier, I talked about the Rome Principles, UNESCO's focus on rights, openness, accessibility, and multi-stakeholder frameworks in approaching the internet and also digital content. And we have developed in this work an index, which is a framework which is built around 303 indicators. And what we've started doing is rolling out assessment studies across, well, actually it's being done globally, but we've also started doing this here in the Arab region. And we've so far launched studies in Tunisia, Sudan, Palestine, and we're hoping to launch another 2 before the end of the year. And basically this research will inform national policies and strategies. And again, focusing on making sure that people can be included, the marginalized group, and also helping governments to more effectively use their digital resources, the internet, to achieve the SDGs. I can say a lot more, but I'll stop here. Thank you very much, Maroulla.
Many thanks, Paul. So this rounds up the main questions and panel discussion we have. But I have a question for Carolina. How much time do we have for Q&A left? We have 2 questions.
Yes, you definitely can go over those questions, Maroulla. Okay, and then we should move to Bruno's presentation. Thank you. Great.
So the first question is specifically about Egypt from Doa Abdel Munaim. And the question is, what are the challenges that Egypt have to deal with for a better transformation process? I don't know who would like to take this question. It's not addressed to anyone in particular. Sharif, would you like to have a go at this?
Sure. Let me just first start, and maybe that's a good segue to answering the question. My colleagues have alluded to that, but I cannot stress more the fact that in the digital transformation ecosystem, the most important element is not the technology, it's not the infrastructure, it's the human capital. And I think that that's where it starts. And I cannot agree more with Dr. Tantawi when he mentioned the innovation capital. So if you look at our region, there has been a lot of work that happened in the space of investing in human capital over the last few years, not that much when it comes to innovation capital. When you look at R&D, when you look at innovation as core, and I'm saying it not that much, and I want to say there's not much at all. And that should be definitely something we need to look at. So when I go to the question of Dua on what are the challenges that Egypt have to deal with for a better transformation process, we start with the people who make the change, the people who transform the organization. If we want to transform itself, we need the human element. You need to be data driven to really dig deep and know the reality on the ground. Sometimes we have impressions, but it does not reflect the actual developments on the ground. And then we need the policies and the environment that supports the transformation, because that affects, as Dr. Tantawi alluded to, so many sectors. It's not just plug and play. Everybody would have loved that, but it's not plug and play. So it's an ecosystem by itself. And that's exactly, I think, what is happening today in the strategy that was formed and being implemented that was not happening before. Before, it was looked at as more or less, I don't want to say silos, but clusters of interesting projects where we do not see the synergies between them. So that answering the point. I want to just go back in less than 10 seconds and reference to something that my colleagues alluded to. We talked about the people who are banking their money, and I said it's no more than 14% of the adult population. Well, this looks really bleak, but when I turn the page and I look at the number of e-wallets in Egypt, well, believe it or not, 13 million, which puzzles everyone. I mean, how come we have less than 14% of the adult population banking their money yet? And that goes exactly to Dr. Tantawi's point that at some point, at any point in time, there are over 15 million people who are online, and it's a technology, call it savvy, call it driven, young population, where I think over 50% of those who have mobile, they are actually holding smart mobile, which again, doesn't, if you want to work the math, something doesn't add up, but it's a reality on the ground. And this is definitely an opportune platform to build on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time now for us to actually see what is the result of the NRA document and analysis. And so it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Lanvin, Director of Indices at INSEAD and co-founder and director at Portulans Institute, to present the results of the Network Readiness Index for 2020. Over to you, Dr. Lanvin.
Everybody sees the first slide?
Yes.
Okay, so hello everybody. Let me take the next 15 minutes or so to describe very briefly what the Network Readiness Report of 2020 contains. The title of the report this year is Accelerating Digital Transformation in a Post-COVID Global Economy. So very much of what has been discussed so far indeed falls into the purview of this report. The report is first and foremost an analysis. So I will develop four points describing what this analysis is based on and leading to what the key messages are and how they could apply to the MENA region. So starting with point number one, what is NRI? What is the Network Readiness Index? Well, the short way to define it is to describe it as a human-centric approach to information and communication technology. The key metrics which are at the core of ICT matter for development, for competitiveness, for everything that belongs to any kind of national strategy. But NRI is not a new kid on the block. It has actually been in existence for almost 20 years now. It was launched officially in 2002 by the World Economic Forum. It was then part of the Global Information Technology Report. The index has been redesigned in 2019 when the governance passed on from the World Economic Forum to Portulans Institute, and that was an opportunity to define it as a future readiness index. In 2020, we welcomed a new sponsor, STL, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but STL is an industry-leading internet providers and the provider of digital network, which many of you may know. So the model is the core of NRI. The underlying principle is that we need to better integrate people on one side and technology on the other side, and governance is the way to do that. So a better governance should help us better combine people and technology. To describe that, the model is based on 4 pillars. Technology clearly is there, people is there, governance is there. In addition to those 3, we have a pillar measuring impact. That is it really happening on the ground? And we try to assess that as well, focusing in particular on elements which are generally described as soft elements like quality of life. But we also give due importance to the pursuit of SDGs and trying to see how network readiness can help us accelerate the implementation of SDGs. That's also in pillar 4. Altogether, these 4 pillars and 12 sub-pillars are described through 60 indicators. The most remarkable thing about the report, of course, is the ranking. This is what media give attention to. This is what governments attach importance to. And this is what we use as the attention catcher. But I rush to say that although the rankings are important, they are not about naming and shaming. The rankings are there to call the attention of decision makers about what can be done in terms of action. And if we look at the top of the rankings in the 2020 report, 134 economies have been covered, and the podium is Sweden, Denmark, Singapore. In the top 10, we have only rich countries with GDP per capita, which are high in the hierarchy, high income countries. And we also see that the top 3 is 3 small countries. So there are already some lessons to draw from the top rankings. One of them is that you don't need to be a very big, powerful economy to do well in terms of network readiness. And the second one is that being a rich country helps. In other words, the digital divide is still very much with us. So going a bit deeper beyond those step ranking, we can see that if we project all data on some kind of simplified 2-dimensional diagram like the one you can see now, which has the NRI score on the vertical axis and the GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. In other words, if you're a rich country, you're to the right of this diagram. If you're a poor country, you're to the left of this diagram. And if you score high on network readiness, you're high on this diagram, and vice versa, you're low on the diagram if you score low. What we can see, just looking at the color coding, which correspond to income group, is that practically all the rich countries are grouped together, top right. Then come the upper middle income countries, followed by the lower middle income countries, followed by the low income countries. So one might say, this is a very sad picture of the world because nothing is changing. We were hoping that technology could reduce inequalities, and we see that actually the Network Readiness Index reflects almost perfectly the hierarchy of income per capita. This is not what this diagram says. This diagram says something much more optimistic. It says that first, if you take the big 2 bubbles, the blue one towards the left and the orange one towards the right, these are India and China. The size of the bubbles is proportional to the size of population. And we see that these 2 heavyweight in terms of population are above the black line, which is a regression line, which means that these 2 major economies in the world are both performing higher on network readiness than what their GDP per capita would suggest. And that tells us that it is possible. It is possible in digital transformation to box higher than your category and to win. So there is a number of elements which are optimistic elements that can be drawn from this diagram if instead of looking at it as a snapshot, we look at it as a dynamic kind of representation of network readiness. So going a bit deeper, we can look at the pillars. If we look at pillar number 1, technology, we see again 3 European countries, high income countries. But if we look at people, we see already Korea emerging. And Korea, in 1964, had the GDP per capita of a country like Ghana. Korea is one of the examples of a country that chose to base its development on 2 pillars, namely digital and education. If we look at impact, we see Singapore at the very top of the ranking. Again, a country which 50 years ago did not exist or was just becoming independent from Malaysia and grew very fast on the ladder of competitiveness, on wealth in the world, basically because they had given due importance to digital transformation. So these are additional lessons to be drawn from the data. If we look at it by income group, again, we see that there are champions in each and every income group. So I will not go in detail discussing those, but if we just take the example of upper middle income countries, we see that Malaysia is coming before China. So there's a few things that have been happening in an economy like Malaysia, which have to do with building a knowledge economy that have been working. Same thing if we look at the low income countries, we see that a country like Rwanda is leading the pack. And there, the lesson is about leadership. It's about building a cohesive society around a number of strategic objectives that have to do with technology and digital transformation. So even if the digital divide is still very much with us, and we see Africa trailing still, it's very important to look at the data with a regional focus, because when you have enough homogeneity among countries, you can really compare what can be done. People should feel familiar with the business practices, with the cultural environment, with the history that guides some of the decisions to be made in an economic, but also in a social or political context. And if we look at the Arab states, which are different from the Mena definition, we see that the GCC countries, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are leading the pack. But we also see, and we'll come back to that in a minute, that the discrepancies between performance in the region is very high. One of the lowest ranking countries in the region is Yemen, and the UAE is among the champions, ranking at 30th. So there are specific lessons to be drawn from NRI if we look at it from a regional context, and especially if we focus on the MENA region. This is what the next two slides are about. If we look at the dispersion of scores per region, we see that in the 2020 edition of the report, 13 countries from MENA were included. So it's not bad. It means that the data is available and that the local statistical apparatus is rather sophisticated, enough at least to allow the ranking. But we also see that in that region, we have 6 high-income economies, basically the oil-rich countries, 2 upper middle income, 4 lower middle income, and 1 low income. Egypt is one of the 4 lower middle income economies. And the ranges are very dispersed, as I mentioned before, from 30th to the UAE to 132nd for Yemen. That tells us that when we look at digital divide, that notion takes a different meaning if we look at it globally, if we look at it regionally, and also if we look at it nationally. It is fair to say that globalization has been reducing inequalities between countries to a large extent, but it has increased disparities within national economies, leading to some disenfranchised portions of the population feeling excluded. If we look at it from the point of view of the pillars, we see that the region as a whole is basically strong in technology and people. Typically, infrastructures are being developed in the right way. They are generally affordable, which increases the ability of people to use it. But the weaknesses remain in both governance and impact. We could go in detail about discussing some of the national examples, but that remains true from all of the region. However, if we compare what is in the red rectangle to what is in the green rectangle, we see that the dispersion, that is the disparity between the top performers and the low performers, is much higher for the weakness areas and for the strength areas. And that means that there is a number of issues that need to be addressed as a matter of urgency among the laggards in the region. The theme, as I mentioned before, is digital transformation. So let me say a few words about how we looked at digital transformation. Basically, we tried to focus on 3 questions, which again, have been discussed very much in the first part of this event. So I will go very quickly in describing them. How is digital transformation impacting global inequality? We had signed 20 years ago that innovation in technology would help us bridge the gap between poor and rich countries, between poor people and rich people. Results have been disappointing in a number of ways. What can be done in that respect? And are the latest developments like artificial intelligence going to help us address this robust digital divide that we still see? Second question, is digital transformation leading to better lives? The idea here is that technology is not an end in itself. We are not trying to develop 5G as a way to enhance the revenue of telcos. We are doing it in the hope that it will improve the lives of people, not just in quantitative terms, in terms of income, but also in qualitative terms. Is it making people happier? Is it making societies more cohesive, more inclusive? These have to do with better lives. Third question, are we controlling or being controlled by technology? And the issue there is that if we look at what's happening in terms of the productive uses of technology and the less productive use of technology, we see a lot of waste. We also see issues coming up in terms of privacy, in terms of influencing decision-making, and how far we've gone from a society which we believe could be fact-based because we would have more information to something where fake news and other aspects have been thriving. So altogether, if we take these three questions, basically the modest ambition of the NRI is to provide a framework and data to make sure that this human technology combination is handled better in the right kind of governance framework. The key messages that emerged from the report this year, and I will just mention them very, very briefly, and our discussion may take us back to some of them. Number one, as Nagla mentioned before, the key message number one is digital transformation needs to be system-wide. It's not enough to be a high performer in one pillar or one sub-pillar in the index to be successful at engineering and guiding digital transformation. If you look at the results per pillar this year, you will notice that Sweden, who is the world champion in 2020 for digital transformation and network readiness, is not number one in any of the pillars. What Sweden does very well is to be a high performer in all four pillars. So the country gives importance to infrastructure, but also to social impact, to inclusion, to trust, and to pursuing SDGs. This is what high performance relates to. Second message, digital transformation will create new forms of digital divide. And we should not be hypnotized by the physical indicators we've been using for 20 years. We've been looking very much at infrastructure, equipment, and affordability. We have now new forms of digital divide. AI is one of the areas where it emerges, but clearly the ability to produce the talents that will be needed to foster digital transformation, the ability to generate gender balance among ICT professions, to have female leaders in the public and private entities that are guiding the transformation is part of these forms of divide that we've seen emerging over the last few years. The third message is about trust and security. Trust and security were introduced this year in the NRI with a much more prominent visibility than before. And trust and security do not have just to do with cybersecurity. Of course, it's important to have trusted network and secure servers if you want people to be encouraged to make payment over the network and to engage in e-commerce. However, it goes far beyond that. It goes into how you want to define privacy, how you want to define authenticity. in your particular economic, social, and cultural environment. And countries have to decide by themselves how they want to do that. But heightening the level of trust will be critical to make digital transformation not only successful, but socially sustainable. The fourth message is that COVID has accelerated digital transformation. This is obvious from our own personal experiences over the last 9 months. But what is becoming obvious is that many things that we thought were not feasible have suddenly become feasible. And that is there to stay. Even if tomorrow the virus goes away, this digital transformation practices are there to stay. 5, education, reskilling, upskilling are critically important for the sustainability of digital transformation. This has been highlighted already by practically all of our panelists. Clearly, talking about the future is talking about youth. The MENA region has a youth advantage. It is a young region. And the figures we heard about Egypt are also very much valid for most of the MENA region. So education, which needs to be lifelong learning, and reskilling will be critically important. 6, digital transformation can accelerate the implementation of SDGs. This has been mentioned. I need not insist more on that. Clearly, we should prevent the younger generation from seeing something we see very much in Europe, the older continent, whereby we have an increasing share of younger generations who say it's too late. Our planet has been wasted. Let's give up. Let's do things, in a small village or environment. Let's close the borders. Let's think of ways to live happy without innovation, without technology. That would be a major mistake to throw the baby with the bathwater. And we all have a collective responsibility to show that it can work. Technology can work to help us address climate change, to address inequalities, to make the world a better place. 7, last but not least, digital transformation can help us rebuild global cooperation and redefine globalization. Globalization is in dire need of being redefined. It needs to be made more human-centric. It should not be seen as an opportunity for large corporations to make hyper profits. And our multilateral edifice has been seriously damaged over the last few years. It needs to be rebuilt, and digital transformation is one of the ways we can use to rebuild it. So these are the points very succinctly I wanted to make about the report. I encourage all of you and everybody who is listening to this presentation to go to the Portulans website. You can play around with the figures, you can simulate few things, you can have deep dive into your own country. I just gave you a short summary of something which is very rich and will be even richer in the years to come as it benefits from your comments, your suggestions, and your criticisms. So thank you in advance.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for your presentation. And I thank all the attendees that have joined us so far. To respond to one of the questions that came through, yes, the slides will be available in the coming weeks, and the video of this event will also be available by tomorrow, actually. So I want to thank Bruno again, and I would like to invite some of our panelists and commentators, including our moderator, Maroulla, who is an expert herself, to comment a little bit back, to comment on what you just learned from Bruno. So what have you learned? What are the examples? What are the things that you would tell our attendees to put attention to? So Sharif, if I can start with you, and thinking more about the region broadly, what are the MENA indicators that you are more excited about, and what indicators you are most worried about?
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you, Bruno, for a spot-on presentation that actually reflects the reality on the ground. So I'll pick on just what I thought was extremely important, which is the positives that he came up with, which is the technology and people. and the negatives, which are the governance and impact. And this sums up the whole setup. And of course, we cannot just brush the whole region with one statement, because as you all rightly said, there are discrepancies amongst the countries, but also within the countries. But I look at that, and maybe I'm not trying to be philosophical, but the more you have a problem, the more you realize that if you start acting, the results are going to show immediately, because the margins of progress could be huge, given that if you look at even the vast majority of the countries in the region are really lagging behind. So the technology infrastructure, in my view, setting up the infrastructure probably is the easiest. You have the finances, you can build up the infrastructure. But again, how to use it, how to actually integrate it within the ecosystem to realize the impact, and then how to manage it in terms of policy development, in terms of policy implementation, in terms of checks and balances, and in terms of realizing the impact across the different sectors. I don't want to repeat what my colleague said, but it's by design an ecosystem that benefits from each other and affect each other. For me, it's like a value chain. And the more it develops across different angles and perspective, the more it benefits and learns from a different parts. So what worries me is the speed of change that is happening outside the region that is not being followed within the region. And the speed of change reflects the opportunities lost as we move forward. We're living in a crazy world where changes are happening all the time. So the more we are sort of slow or not adaptive, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, the bigger the gap. And then we come back to the issue of inequality.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Sharif. Thank you. And Dr. Ahmed Tawani, if you could improve a couple of elements in the MENA region, especially around the issue of governance and how that governance helps to benefit people, what would be some of your advice?
Well, governance is clearly an issue, and I'd like to actually look at the root causes of that. One is that the rules and the whole process of governing things is not really solid. Sometimes it's not even well defined. But in most cases, even if you define it well, the execution is a problem. And from my experience, execution is the biggest problem in the region, as a matter of fact. So people resist to change. We know that. We all resist change. But the resistance is huge. And there are many things at stake. As I mentioned, power, turfs, and all these kind of things. They are really a problem. That's one thing. The other thing is the level of competence of the leadership in the digital domain, right? They don't feel comfortable, and you need to train those people. Sometimes we forget that, and sometimes they are shy. They don't want to be seen as learners because they're leaders. So they don't want to, and we tend to teach and train the young people and forget about the leaders, those who lead them. Therefore, you have a group of people with a leadership that is, basically runs contrary to the flow. If I may, I'd like to actually to ask a question just to make sure are we moving in the right direction or not as a region? If you compare, Bruno, the progress, right, made in the different categories, the different geographies, and the different economic groups, high income and so on. Do you see them moving at the same pace? One is slower than the other. I would appreciate if you could give us some feedback on that. Thank you.
I shall happily respond to that. Maybe we should finish with the questions from the various panelists, and I will go back gladly to Ahmed's question.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Bruno. And I just want to make sure that the attendees saw the link I shared for the website, and everybody can also see the previous reports for the NRI since like going back over a decade. And that data is also available for download, the data from this year. So you all can also play a little bit with that. So Professor Nagla, in the age of globalization, we can view a country performance in isolation, right? I think this comparative perspective that the NRI gives us is very rich because also helps us see what are best practice, what is working, what is not, what are measurements you can tackle. So how do you think you can leverage the linkages between countries to improve the region overall performance?
Thank you, Carolina. I was thinking, you know, like when I was listening to Bruno's presentation, the paradox of the digital economy works globally too. So the situation is with the, you know, growth of digital technologies and the potential, the tremendous potential that is there. Are we looking at convergence or divergence? Are we looking at further inequalities between different players, or are we looking actually at the potential for convergence between the different countries? And one thing that is quite hopeful actually is, and that was mentioned by Dr. Ahmed, I believe, the idea of the availability of online resources, open knowledge. Today, we are forced, everybody is studying, I teach online, my students go online, everybody is forced to actually go and search for knowledge online. Universities are putting out their courses online. This is an opportunity for countries like ours and the global south in general to provide their own knowledge online for better access. So this offers a chance for access to knowledge between the different players and for us to play active role in content. I worry about our role in content. Just if I may just jump to the question that you asked my colleagues, I worry about contribution to content from this part of the world. I worry about the ability of or the opportunity and the capability of our intellectual capital to be developed enough to be part of this knowledge hub globally that is happening. And my fear is that if skills are not developed in a way to make us part of this, we're really going to fall behind. So there is the threat globally of AI becoming black boxes, of trade secrets, of knowledge being encapsulated in closed models, but there is also the opportunity of open business models, open data, flexible intellectual property, alternative ways for knowledge to flow better between different players in the world. And this will definitely prove the promise of knowledge as a cornerstone for development. There is, on the one hand, for example, the threat of brain drain, of intellectual capital ending up in the global north and our countries falling behind. Why don't we then think of ways of having collaborative models of our of growing skills of our human resources in a way that's very conscious of how can we retain them? How can we retain our people so as to allow for this growth of grounds up organic knowledge production that can help the livelihood of people? And I guess there is a great opportunity for international organizations. I mean, efforts by UNESCO, and other collaborators. I mean, your institute, the Portulans Institute, and the different international organizations, and for universities, for educators. We are part of research, global research networks that can try and mitigate the inequalities in knowledge, which are themselves definitely triggers for global development inequalities. So let's just hope that in this age of day and time where people are pushed to go online, that this can be a chance for convergence rather than divergence in global development levels.
Thank you, Nagla. Thank you so much. And I love the optimistic view and the idea of collaboration. Just yesterday, Bruno and I and our colleague Sumitra Dutta, we were in a panel with the Global Business School Network talking exactly about that, the role also of academia and universities to support this collaboration, this leadership, and this change, right? Really embracing the change that digital transformation brings, even when a lot of times the political leadership is not being a leader in that direction, right? So thank you for that perspective. Maroulla, if I can come back to you, but now as a commentator, based on your experience in the region, how can MENA countries improve the digital ecosystem so people benefit even further from ICTs? And based on your experience, I would like to add, have you seen any best practices that the rest of the world can actually learn from? Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Carolina. I would like to challenge a little bit some of the premises that we, my fellow panelists and Dr. Bruno talked about. And this is technology and infrastructure. They are two different things. Technology is there, it's easily adopted, it's cheap and becoming cheaper and cheaper. And it's not a problem. But infrastructure in the Middle East and MENA is still a problem. i.e., if we look at the numbers, we still have around some calculations we made recently, more than 250 million people in MENA region that are not using 4G. In Iraq itself, 4G is only in part of the north. You have this is on the mobile network. You have a tremendous amount of investment that needs to be done to improve the quality of service. How many of us have just calls, dropped calls, not even talking about the quality of the download and upload speed and the jitter that spoils, hello. So infrastructure is still a problem, both in terms of access and quality of service. Affordability can be considered getting better, but quality of service, if I want to look at on the fixed and the fiber side, the penetration of household fiber connectivity per household in MENA is very, very low. And if we really want to compete, if we really want to be at par with emerging and leaders in technologies and digital transformation, we have to invest more in fiber. We have to invest more in quality of service. For instance, in Romania, the download speed can reach up to 190 megabits per second for fixed. The average of the Middle East is 30. Thailand also can reach 170 and 150. These are, I'm not talking about countries that are already on the top of the list in everything related to digital. These are countries that have worked to improve their digital transformation and made sure we have the infrastructure that can accompany that. And in the MENA region, infrastructure is still a problem in terms of access and quality. And what is refraining that is not the technology, is the enabling environment, is the rules and regulation, is the laws we have that many times inhibit more private sector investment, or to acquire more private sector expertise and efficiency in our sectors. We have, for instance, in Lebanon, the fixed network is still run by a government entity, not even a corporate entity. In Iraq, we have an SOE that has the de facto monopoly on infrastructure, fiber deployment. These are very important issues that we need to tackle so that we are able to upload the files we need if we are a small business in Lebanon or in Iraq or in Egypt, that we are able to learn, to have these courses online without being interrupted. So from my perspective, all of the ecosystem needs to be worked on, but let's not forget the enabling environment for the infrastructure and how we can, how government and policymaker can open more the market to investment and to private capital and to private expertise. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Maroulla. And we saw that transition happening in the 80s and early 90s in so many countries. For example, Latin America, a region that I come from, originally from Brazil. So it's interesting to see that lots of countries in the region have not yet gone through that transition. So Paul, can I ask you some of your comments and reflections based on what was discussed so far?
Yes, thank you very much, Carolina. I was very much impressed by the 7 points which Bruno raised, because again, there's so much similarity between what he's found and also some of the work that we're doing. I'd just like to maybe touch on two areas. One was about the importance of system-wide approaches. And of course, within this sector, where different actors are playing different roles, but also complementary roles. Again, this is really, really key. And how do we overcome some of the barriers to collaboration and cooperation? I'd be interested to hear some of what you've seen. And you also mentioned, you talked about the sort of apathy which in some areas young people are experiencing, where people are sort of rejecting, they're sort of like stepping back. And when we think about this within the context of developed countries, one might say, well, there's lots of reason for optimism, lots of reason for hope. And of course, when one, let's say, translates to, let's say, countries where maybe the social economic nets are not as strong, there can perhaps be even greater shifts towards, let's say, disillusionment. And I just wonder, maybe what you could share with us with that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, so much. And Bruno, if I may if I can come back to you, but I also wanna, if you can tackle some of the questions in the Q&A. Fadi Sian asks, will the digital transformation offer opportunities to marginalized people and enhance economic inclusion, or maybe inclusion, or maybe will it increase economic disparity?
Okay, thank you, Carolina. Thank you all. I think indeed there is convergence between the questions we see in the Q&A and the points raised by the panelists just now. So let me start with the very good points that Maroulla was making about infrastructure. Let's not diminish the challenge that remains about infrastructure in Mena and in other parts of the world. But in Mena, there is a particular challenge which has to do with the uneven distribution of populations. There are large desertic areas. If you look at the population of Egypt, it is largely concentrated around the Nile River and basically between Cairo and Alexandria. So you have a very well-deserved population where it is relatively concentrated, and much larger difficulties in other parts, more rural areas of the country. This is even more true of a country like Saudi Arabia, where beyond something between 12 and 15 cities, actually you get 85% of the population, and you have major challenges to get full coverage in terms of infrastructure. Those countries in the MENA region that are doing better in terms of infrastructure development are those which have a more compact geography. They are typically countries like Jordan or Oman, and for very understandable reasons. The progress made in the region with satellite communication is one of the tools to be used to enhance access and foster infrastructure. But as Maroulla underlined, a key underlying factors is about the regulatory environment and how competition takes place or not. So allowing investors to move in, to develop infrastructures is critically important. One of the most striking examples I kept in memory from my time working on these issues at the World Bank was what happened in Chile. Chile is geographically challenged. Okay, basically 3,000 kilometers from north to south, a very narrow band of land. So you can imagine the difficulties you have to develop even infrastructure in that kind of geography. So the government decided, and the World Bank was helping with that, to develop a reverse auction, to say, put in an envelope the amount of government subsidy you need to develop infrastructure in the northern Arica Desert part of Chile. And much to the surprise of the government, the winning figures were negative figures. In other words, the companies were saying, we don't need your money. We are ready to give you money to go there and develop the infrastructures, because the investors had seen positive development likely to happen, which the government had not seen. And it proved a remarkable success. I could go for hours on the Chilean example. We can see something similar in Mena. And then I come back to the questions raised by Ahmed Tantawi and Paul Hector about is Mena heading in the right direction, and how are we raising appetite for change? And I also go back to Sherry's point. The best ingredient for success in change is appetite. If people have an appetite for change, there's a very great likeliness that change will succeed. If they have no appetite for change, they will resist it by any which way they can. This is where the silos, the egos come in. I used to say, looking at digital transformation, it's all about the E's. You can develop e-commerce, you can develop e-government, you can develop e-health, e-education, e-everything. If you don't deal with egos, nothing happens. And you have egos everywhere. You have egos in ministries, you have egos in private sector, you have egos all over the place. So the importance of leadership, as Sharif mentioned before, is critically important. The higher the leadership in digital transformation, the better. We need role model. Now, very few people, very few countries are as privileged as Singapore. Singapore has a prime minister who can code. That's an exception. I've seen him in meetings about e-education, discussing all the products that needed to be developed, and then going back after he left the podium to one of the developers of the government app and say, I look at your code, maybe there's a few places where it can be optimized. Let's not assume that we're going to have that kind of leadership all over the world, but just having a leadership who says, I will not tolerate any feud between silos, between ministries. We have a common objective, we have a strategy, we own that strategy, and this is what we want to do, is critically important. Regarding this appetite for change, and I will finish on that, you can change many, many things, and MENA can change many, many things. But there are three things which cannot be changed. These three things are history, geography, and demography. And the three can be turned into advantages in the MENA region. Look at history. Look just at Egypt, but many other countries in the region. 4,000, 5,000 years of history standing in front of us. In my own country, until the 13th century, medical studies took place in Arabic. Mathematicians were dealing in Arabic. So there's a history which is also about knowledge that can be developed. It can be used as a tool for digital transformation. Geography, similar. You cannot change geography. You cannot change the fact that there are many deserts, that there are small countries and big countries. But that can be turned into an advantage. Looking at how the Suez Canal has changed the geography of the world, not just the local geography, is an example of everything that can be done. Geography today is not just planetary geography. The moon, Mars are part of the geography. We have an Arabic probe sent by the UAE, which is on its way to Mars. So geography needs also to be used to the advantage of the region. And last but not least, demography, a young region. This is the biggest incentive, the biggest energy one can think of. It is not one on which Europe can rely. It is one on which MENA can rely. Japan is handicapped by its age pyramid. And I'm using the word pyramid here on purpose. The pyramid is inverted in MENA. So all these are advantages. If we look at what have been the most successful countries in digital transformation, we see countries like Singapore, like Switzerland. Why did they move into the digital area and innovation area? Because they had no choice. Singapore could not exist without any natural resources if it did not move into human-intensive, innovation-intensive activities. Switzerland in 1850 was the poorest country in Europe. They were landlocked. They had only mountains and cows. What could they do? Well, they imagined their future. They created their future. So this is where MENA is today. And COVID is going to accelerate the appetite, is going to accelerate the enthusiasm, is going to accelerate success.
Thank you so much, Bruno. And in one of the commentaries, Frederick Lidane mentioned, while I agree the first two are non-changeables, he asks why demography cannot change. And here, I think you were mentioning the people themselves in the region, but of course, talent can always improve. And I share with all the attendees the Global Talent and Competitiveness Index, which is another index that you work on. So thank you so much for all those comments. And we just have a couple of minutes left. So I want to come to some of the questions that came up in the chat and Q&A. So one question is regarding the Palestine region. The participant, Samir, mentions all the difficulties they have with infrastructure, that they can generally just have access to 3G and 2G in the Gaza. So his question is, given all these constraints, what are the panelists' advice? And Mr. Oh, where? Here you are. Tawani, could you address that, please?
I can try, but without getting into international politics and the whole thing, I just I can think of one of the lessons that we learned from COVID-19, right? The world, the physical world at least, is really very small. With all the barriers and all the bans on travel and all these kind of things, the pandemic spread. We've had problems across the universe because maybe of some lack of focus or lack of controlling the situation in one part of the world. I guess we move from the physical world to the digital world or the cyber world. The cyber world is actually harder to have boundaries in. Therefore, it is very important for us to ensure that the cyber world is healthy everywhere. Otherwise, there will be viruses, there will be issues, not necessarily viruses in the security issue, but issues that can spread across the world. If part of that cyberspace is not well managed or well apportioned and so on, the rest of the system can fall apart. That's one thing. The second thing is that I believe that communication, the ability to communication, access information digitally is part of the human rights, maybe de facto right nowadays. So that has to be enforced. The third point is that can the world help the countries and the nations and even parts of nations that are longing for better infrastructure, better transformation, and cannot get it for whatever reason it is? I don't know. That's a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would just like to go ahead. Yes.
Just on Palestine, Palestine is a very good example because we have difficulties, of course, getting the data, including the analysis. But one thing we have not mentioned in the discussion is the increasing role of cities. By 2050, 2.5 additional billion people will live in cities. So the digital transformation will take place in cities. And last year, and I'm just showing another book here, we looked at smart cities around the world. The book is called 16 Shades of Smart. That helps with the shades. And the Ramallah was part of the 16 cities we selected. So even when you have difficulties getting national data, because the nation itself is not necessarily recognized by everybody, you can look at lower level of granularity and see what's happening on the ground. And cities are a very good places for that. And what we've seen in Ramallah is that because they are very specific, very important challenges, the dynamism, the imagination, the innovation coming from the people is amazing. So that's one lesson we've drawn from looking at what was happening inside Palestine.
Thank you, Bruno, so much. And for all the attendees, make sure to take a look in the chat because I'm sharing some links to resources. So I'm just gonna go in order here in my screen to give you all 1 minute closing remarks. So Sharif, may I start with you? You are on the top of my screen over here.
Well, thank you, Carolina. I want to thank all the participants for their insightful and enlightening remarks and all the and their contribution. I'm by design an optimistic person, not just hopeful, but optimistic. And given what we've heard today, I think we know what needs to happen, what needs to be done. The question is when it will be done, because I do not think, given the changes that happen, when we've seen how the world has changed drastically over the last 10 months, I don't think time is on the side of the countries that are lagging behind when it comes to the digital transformation. And then again, that's one element of the ecosystem. And like all my colleagues here on the panel alluded to, it's a comprehensive, holistic ecosystem that has to be plugged in with the support and enabling environment. So hopefully we've seen the NRI this year. We hopefully when the next edition comes out, we see progress across the different countries in the MENA region. And thank you all for participating.
Ahmed?
Yeah, thank you. Just, you know, in half a minute, I guess I'd use the word collaboration and help and support. Maybe we need to help each other, especially in the region, because we have similar problems, we have similar issues. Of course, there are differences, but I think coming together and looking at how we can help each other improve would be great. Thank you.
Paul?
Hi, thank you very much. I think this is actually a very gives many reasons for optimism. It's really wonderful when we can see sort of like the practices and experiences from other places, and you know, I really hope that we can continue documenting these and sharing these so that we can inspire others so that they can take actions. Because I think basically we know the solutions, we know things that need to be done, and yeah, it's just for us to move and really make it happen. Thank you.
Let's keep working. Thank you, Paul. Maroulla?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Yes, briefly, I just want to thank everyone and say I have learned quite some new things during this session, and I'm thankful for the optimism and the new ideas that I've learned that probably, you know, and happy to take over to our engagement with MENA countries. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you. And I hope we all learn to code too, like the president of Singapore. Nagla?
Thank you very much. This is a chance to thank you all and thank Portulans Institute. I will say 2 words: context matters. Our region has a unique context. We have a wealth of human resources. Let's use it as an asset and not a liability. And hopefully the results will be towards moving for better achievement of SDGs and a better world using the technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, and Bruno, if I may give you the word to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you to everybody on this very exciting panel. I think a key word for me is openness. Cooperation clearly is part of it. Openness is not just about open trade and openness to investment, and it's also open minds. Looking at the ways others do it, they address the problems, they find new solutions will be critically important. This is part of education, it's part of cooperation. And since Paul just mentioned the problem and the solution, our task is to make sure that technology is not a solution in search of a problem. We have enough problems in front of us to identify how technology can help. Gender is part of that, as I mentioned before. And let me be very nationalistic here. I do believe that the French language is probably the best language in the world to address gender issues, because it's a language in which the problem is masculine and the solution is feminine.
Thank you, Bruno. Very good, very good. So I'm always optimistic if we end up with that note. So for the attendees that have asked, this event has been was recorded, is being recorded, and the record and the recap, a summary of it will be posted tomorrow in our Portulans blog. There you can also see all the recaps and videos for the highlights for other regions we have done in the past few weeks. So thank you everybody and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.